Hey Tacoma, this is Abby, and this is our 5th Flash Poetry Friday workshop. Welcome to the trees that are not so far from my house.
Hey Tacoma, let's go for a socially distanced walk!
So have you written your pandemic poem yet? I ask because I've been reading a lot of them, and they are all so different. A pandemic poem isn't necessarily one that's about a virus or mentions COVID explicitly. Pandemic poem is a poem written in our time, in this historical moment. It's a poem that addresses isolation, community, longing, the human body, observations that we might never have made if not for these circumstances. Pandemic poems show what it all comes down to. And there's one that I just read that I wanted to share with you by Ada Limón. I'm going to have to find a place to sit down real quick. Okay, this is me sitting on a tree reading Ada Limón. This is called The End of Poetry, and it should come out next week in the print issue of The New Yorker, but you can find it online at thenewyorker.com. The End of Poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy and the stoic farmer and faith and our Father and 'tis of thee, enough of bosom and bud, skin and God, not forgetting and star bodies and frozen birds, enough of the will to go on and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing, enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up, enough of the gun, the drama, and the acquaintance's suicide, the long-lost letter on the dresser, enough of the longing and the ego and the obliteration of ego, enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child, and enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate, enough of the brutal and the border, enough of can you see me, can you hear me, enough I am human, enough I am alone and I am desperate, enough of the animal saving me, enough of the high water, enough sorrow, enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me. What I love about Limón's poem, The End of Poetry, is that it uses a repeated dismissal, the word enough, to highlight a slew of poetry's comfort zones and hot spots. But everything clinches on this last line, I am asking you to touch me. This is what poetry comes to, ultimately. Poetry is process, not stagnation, and it is looking for human connection. It is looking for us to touch. So what I want you to do this week is write your pandemic poem. And here's a couple of challenges. The first challenge is don't mention the virus. Don't mention COVID specifically. Write in the moment. The second challenge is use anaphoric rhythms that repeat a certain word or a phrase, like without, because I expected, while I was out. Use something that repeats. See how many details that unearths. When you've got those poems drafted, go ahead and send it over to me at gritcitypoetlaureate@gmail.com. I would love to read them. I'll share what I came up with too. And I'll see you next week for week 6 of Flash Poetry workshops. And now I'm going to go find my kid.
It's a squirrel. He came for the workshop.